Hi, I'm Sam Guckenheimer from Visual Studio Team Services. I'm here to talk about how you use security in your continuous integration pipeline, how you create a rugged DevOps practice. Now, you've probably seen the corresponding videos that my friends have done, Gopi Chickagari on continuous integration and continuous delivery using Visual Studio Team Services, and Alex Mullins on using package management. I'm going to not repeat their material, but assume that you've got it. So you know by now how Visual Studio Team Services gives you great continuous integration. That means you can use your release pipeline, just like we do, to deploy many, many times a day. However, do you have security testing practices that allow you to keep up with that velocity? What happens when we talk to customers is that we hear, well, you know, the InfoSec guys, they do security scanning once a quarter, or they do it with every major release. And then we get lots of issues, and we get them kind of late, and it's hard for us to deal with them when we get them. This is true in two ways. First, if you're using open source software, you're not only getting great power from reuse of those capabilities, but you're also reusing vulnerabilities. And indeed, according to Verizon's Data Breach Intelligence Report, 85% of the major data breaches they investigated came from known vulnerabilities, the common vulnerability enumerations in the national database. So you need to be careful with open source. You need to scan for any components you're reusing, and you need to know what you might be exposing yourself to. So let's take a look at how you can do that in your CI pipeline with one of our partners, WhiteSource. Now, the way you get the extensions, if you haven't done this before, is by means of the Visual Studio Team Services Marketplace. You can get there by looking up the Visual Studio Marketplace. You can click on Visual Studio Team Services. You'll see the hundreds of extensions we've got. These are the ones I'm going to focus on for security. As I said before, I will start with WhiteSource. I've set up a build definition with the WhiteSource task that the extension adds. It pulls in the appropriate file types, it uses the right endpoint, and then it will tell me about the open source composition. For this demo and for the others, I'm going to use the WebGoat project that OWASP.org publishes for security training. It's an intentionally vulnerable web project. Let's see what WhiteSource finds. On the home page of WhiteSource, I see a quick dashboard that lets me know how many vulnerabilities I have and what each of them is. And I also see license distribution, so I can test against policy rules for which open source licenses I have allowed. For example, right here, I see that there's a GPL license, which typically might not be allowed in my organization because it's copyleft, and I could drill into that to look at the particular offender with that license. Let's drill in, however, into security vulnerabilities, since that's what we're focusing on today. Let me look at all of the vulnerabilities together. Now, one of the cool things here in WhiteSource is that not only do I have the vulnerability, not only does it tell me where it comes from, tells me how it was identified, in this case from the National CVE database, but it recommends as well to me the top fix for this, the most frequent fix. So in this case, it's to upgrade my version of the Tomcat server. And it gives me options for which upgrades are available that I can use that are free from this vulnerability. Same thing for the next commons jar file, and so forth. So for each of these, where there are top fixes, WhiteSource identifies them. Where there are many of them, it will give you further details. That's a fantastic way to get a handle on what's in your project in terms of components. So that was WhiteSource inside the Visual Studio Team Services continuous integration pipeline, picking up the open source components that you're consuming and showing you both the security vulnerabilities and the policy violations for misused licenses. That's fantastic for the things you reuse. What about the code you develop? This is where static analysis security testing comes in. It reviews your code. Think of it as an automated code reviewer on your team. And with appropriate static analysis tools, you can see vulnerabilities that are traced back to the specific line of source code where you need to remediate. I'm going to show you two options here that will help you by giving you that analysis deep into your code and showing you where the vulnerabilities are at the specific line. Let's start with Veracode. This is a build I've created with the Veracode extension. The typical sequence is that you run the build, you publish the binary, and upload it to the Veracode service for scanning. You can see that the extension handles this for you. It uses the service connection to Veracode. We're going to use the same WebGoat example in this demo. And when I run that build, the Veracode results come back. As you can see, the build failed because I'd set in the build definition a build break to happen on this scan. And I can see number of flaws and click into the Veracode summary. Now in Veracode, I have each of these flaws enumerated for me. I can load in the source file to match them, which I've done here. And I see that the top one coming out here is a SQL injection attack. SQL injection attack is identified in the national database of weaknesses. I can read that directly from here. But most useful is that Veracode shows me exactly the line of source and gives me guidance at that line on what to do. So I can see here the description of the flaw. It's a database query that allows SQL injection. Here's the particular call. There's a variable that comes from input. The input is not guarded and filtered. So the remediation is don't construct SQL queries like that and guard your input. Use stored procedures or something like that. And it's taking me exactly to the offending line of code. Another option for static analysis is check marks. Check marks also scans your code. It does so on a server if you're choosing, or an IS instance if you're choosing in Azure. And it also shows you a summary of the vulnerabilities on the build page. If I look at the build page and click on the detailed checkmarks report, I get to the listing of the vulnerabilities, and I get to the corresponding source. Now, what's interesting here is that I can see for each of these vulnerabilities what it is. This will filter for me the list of vulnerabilities. You'll see guidance. This create content gets data from the database for execute query. And the element value then flows through the code without being properly filtered, and so forth. That's great guidance, and it takes me to a particular line where this happens. Now, checkmarks also lets me see, in a graph form, all of the data flow that takes me to that line, so I can identify that indeed there are common paths that can all be fixed by going right here to this line. And here I can filter the input and guard against that vulnerability. This best place to fix is a really cool feature of checkmarks, and the visibility of the data flow graph is a real aid to understanding how these flaws can occur. Also available with checkmarks is the idea that I can do an incremental scan, like you see here in this build definition. So after the initial scan, I can run this in CI and just have the changes examined by checkmarks. This allows the scan to run in minutes. And by doing that, it fits in the timing of a CI flow very nicely. I've shown you 3 partners from the marketplace and how you use their extensions inside your continuous integration pipeline. WhiteSource for open source scanning, Veracode, and checkmarks for static analysis. There are a couple others. HP Security Fortify also gives you static analysis, and Aqua is available for cracking Docker containers if you're using Docker, and letting you know about the security vulnerabilities in the components there, and letting you set up a trusted repository from which you can pull your containers. These, of course, work with our own package management extensions or other package repositories that you're using in your pipeline. So I've shown you these partners in the Visual Studio Team Services Marketplace. Partners who provide security scanning for you to integrate in your continuous integration pipeline. Why would you do that? Why would you put security into your pipeline? Because now you can. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you've also taken a look at Gopi's on continuous integration and Alex's on package management. Look forward to seeing you in the community.